I know you mentioned specific areas, but can you talk about more specifics of those?
Well, some of them are about the resources that are allocated, but then there will be applications for grants and all the rest. And so important to it all is the local support for an entity. So that will count a lot. Uh, how can I say this nicely? We want Dirk to fly. So if there is a project that is making an appeal for a grant, we want to have the locality, the locals and the regional support for it across the board, so that we don't spend the next 5 years in court instead of celebrating in another year that. So again, it's $5.3 billion to fix roads and bridges, $1.9 to upgrade public transit, $71 billion to install electric vehicle charging stations, and then Derek Kilmer referenced broadband and other aspects of this. So it's almost every aspect of infrastructure that is there, but again, not telling people where they should spend it, but listening to the community and where there's a commonality of interest. And on that score, I'll yield to the locals to say what some of their priorities might be.
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. And so this is a 5-year program, and the money will come directly to the state. There'll be various grant programs, but we're really going to respect the local communities to tell us where they want to spend the money. And we talk about projects that are shovel ready, but also too, for me, it's a term about shovel worthiness. And so let's make sure that these projects have regional impact, but let's respect what the local communities tell us they want. And this is a good example of that. Don Anderson came to me in 2021 and said, I got this project about removing a dam. I said, you want to remove a dam, really? And as we talked about the entire project, there's no one who loses out on this. So I think that's one good example of how this will work.
Derek, did you want to
Next question.
Okay. So, before we went in to see the president of Ukraine, we had a prayerful moment among those of us who were privileged to be on that visit, each according to his own faith tradition, because for us it was a very solemn occasion. To be the highest ranking, but others on the trip very high ranking as well, to go see the president of a country that was under siege. Ukraine, the people of Ukraine are fighting for democracy, their democracy and everyone else's, because Putin had invaded them because they were a democracy, and he couldn't handle a democracy at the doorstep of Russia, where people thrived, loved their democracy, were willing to fight for it in previous times. And then now, he thought that since we were having kind of a family conversation here, let's call it Dawn, imagine he had a band when he went into going into Kiev, he had a band that was ready to lead the charge of the troops because he thought everybody was going to join in celebration. How sick is that? We want dictatorship, not democracy. Let's have a band to celebrate that. And so he was quite surprised, and that was a victory for democracy and the Ukrainian people that they pushed him away from Kyiv, but now the fight is elsewhere. So anyway, the purpose of our trip was to thank the people of Ukraine for their strength and courage, for their courage to fight against totalitarianism, dictatorship, and for democracy. And again, their fight is a fight for the whole NATO, we're part of NATO. So what are the 4 categories that we discussed as to how we could tangibilize, is that a word, our admiration? That would be sanctions, strengthen the sanctions, see what was working better than others. And the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, Gregory Meeks from New York, spoke with great authority on that. That very week in Congress, with the support of our colleagues here, we passed 2 bills already. The Lend-Lease Act, which I signed when I got off the plane 2 nights ago, and it's sent over to the president. He will be signing it right away. So that's it. And then we pass something called, what I call, seize and freeze. Seize the Russian assets, freeze them, and when they thaw, use the money to rebuild Afghanistan. Ukraine. I have the Afghanistan right. Ukraine. Because the Russians destroyed it, their money should pay for the rebuilding of it. So we have sanctions. The next category I would divide into 3 categories: weapons, weapons, and weapons. That is really essential to strengthening their hand, increasing their leverage, and preparing their people for the big fight. We have been generous. We have done many things, and I salute again President Biden for his unifying leadership with NATO and within our own country. This legislation is being written right now as we speak in a very, very bipartisan way. I'll come back to that in a second. The next thing is humanitarian assistance. Half the population of Ukraine is either displaced, refugee, or under fire. Under fire. They need food, they need water, they need so many things. And we have been generous, as so have the NATO countries. And after what we went to Poland, and I'll talk about that afterward. Now, under humanitarian, again, this may be more than you thought you were getting, is one very important subject: food. Food. People are starving. Food. Now, Ukraine has been the breadbasket to the world. Their product this year, their crop is overwhelming. They have that food, but they have to get it to the places that you need it. And they have to sell it to the world. And they have to, for example, Africa, places like that will have starvation because they're not having the food from Ukraine. So it's a humanitarian issue, it's a security issue, and it's an economic issue because the people of Ukraine need to have the money, the government needs to have the resources to pay the troops, the teachers, the functioning part of the government. So food issue led by Jim McGovern, who's the chair of the Rules Committee, but Mr. Food Security in the Congress. And then we talked about weapons and that, and sanctions weapons, and weapons. We had the chair of the Intelligence Committee, Adam Schiff, there to talk about intelligence and weapons and the rest. And Jason Crow was the other member who was with us. He's a member of the Intelligence Committee, but Armed Services Committee. And I say he was there because he's a veteran, and he served in the 82nd Airborne, which is the division. The 82nd Airborne is what that are there right on the border that we visited with. And imagine to have a member of Congress who served in the 82nd, who speaks their language and the rest. So his knowledge of the weaponry was just so impressive to hear. But in every case, whether we're talking weapons, we're talking humanitarian, we're talking sanctions, we're talking economic, the president of Ukraine was fully engaged, strong, knowledgeable, values-based, caring for his people. Just so remarkable. And really not having much governmental experience before becoming president of the United States. A hero to the world. And he went out there and, he greeted us on the street. I was surprised because I was going right in the building and they said, no, he's greeting you outside. And I felt as if I were visiting Washington crossing the Delaware because he was so brave. And this was so timely and so critical. And so when you say that you have any difference of opinion coming back, well, this is what we suspected. This is why we went. And this was the confirmation that we received. The courage is boundless. The bravery, the courage just to fight them, but the bravery among the troops of the so brave, but the troops so brave to go into the fight. The success that they are having has made us all very proud that America was playing such a leading role in all of it. We saw that our confidence was well placed, and we were just overwhelmed, I think, with the presentation of the President of Ukraine. So again, our president has put forth the $33 billion. We'll have at least that. We're writing the bill now, and hopefully we'll be able to vote on it next week. But legislation takes a little time. But time is lives saved if we can get the resources there.
Can the country afford another supplemental spending bill, $33 billion?
Can the country afford to protect our democracy? Yeah. That's it. I'm so pleased that you made that little challenge there, because the fact is, democracy is at stake. Our national security is affected by this. And again, the leadership role that we play in the world is one that is essential to the essence of who we are, but important to the rest of the world. The question you asked, can we afford it? We can't afford not to do it. We can't afford not to do it. That's true. And American people support that in large numbers, 2 to 3 to 1 support that we should be helping them, and by the same numbers that we should not go in. So they're fighting a fight for all of us. In terms of inflation, well, the Putin tax at the pump has contributed. I'm not saying the whole increase in the price of the pump is Putin, but a large part of it is. When you have narrower supply, you have higher prices. That's just the way it is. But the president has released, in order to increase the supply, released oil from the Sprout, and he has. We have, in the leadership of Maria Cantwell, she has been a real champion in writing the bill and in the lead on some of the manipulation that the oil companies are engaged in that keeps the price of oil up. So we have to deal with some of these issues for the ongoing, not just for the moment, but at the moment they are urgent. Some of our inflation springs from the fact that President Biden, under his leadership and the Congress of the United States and the private sector, cut unemployment in half, 8 million jobs, a record number of jobs, more than in generations, created in 1 year. So when unemployment goes down, cut in half, inflation goes up. It doesn't mean we welcome it. It means that we have to deal with it. And when you're talking about oil prices, you're talking about food prices. And the impact on agriculture, the cost of fertilizer and fuel and all the rest, raises the price of the kitchen table. The kitchen table is what we are all about. What are the concerns of America's working families, whether it's the cost of prescription drugs, insulin and other prescription drugs, whether it's the cost of their food on the table, price at the pump and all of that. That's the fight that we make. But we don't say we can't afford to honor our oath to protect and defend the American people because we have other priorities, like tax cuts at the high end or something. But anyway, not to get into that. So anyway, no, we'll have very strong bipartisan support for this legislation, and we're very proud of that. And the Democrats and Republicans are working together to write the bill right now.
Madam Speaker, how does the apparent overturning
Thank you.
I just want to invite my colleagues if they want to say anything about the Ukraine.
From what I've seen, I was not the highest ranking person, or did I go there, but I think one thing that's been very apparent is the resolve of the Ukrainian people, and the fact that Vladimir Putin thought he was going to divide NATO, and this shows that he's in a bubble, and what he did was strengthen NATO. You have countries who want to become part of NATO, and so I think it had the opposite effect of what he thought it would happen, Chris. And, as the speaker mentioned earlier, the price of inaction is going to put democracy in jeopardy. We're fighting for democracy around the world right now, and that's a really big deal. And then as far as inflation goes, this is not unique to the US. This is happening around the world because the global supply chain has been affected by what's happening in Russia. So the high prices you see, that's happening everywhere. It's not unique to the US, but as mentioned earlier, unemployment is down, wages are up. That's a good problem to have, but we're gonna do what we can to get through this because it's not easy for families, and we're very, very aware of that.
I'll just add, it's not just NATO that's been united. Most of Congress has been united in taking action to support Ukraine. Whether we're talking about ending importation of oil and gas from Russia, whether we're talking about these sanctions, including the bills we just passed last week, thankfully you've seen strong support from both Democrats and Republicans to stand up for democracy.
And they stop purchasing Russian oil, which again lowers the supply, raises the price. But it is. Let me just share this one thing with you that, as I said, I have this ring from the women in Afghanistan. The plight of women in all of these situations is a barometer of the cruelty and the cowardice of somebody like a Putin who goes in and has his troops raping little girls, 11 years old, again and again and again in front of their parents and grandparents, raping their moms in front of the children, and then taking the children off to Russia, away from where they have lived, just kidnapping the children. This is what is happening to women and girls and civilians in Russia. Is such an act of cowardice on the part of, as I mentioned earlier, on the part of Putin. If you want to fight a fight, but don't go after the civilians and think that you're some kind of a promoter of equality. He brought in a band to celebrate the takeover of Ukraine, thinking that people would cheer them on. Instead, they're fighting for freedom, and we have a responsibility to join in that fight for freedom. And overwhelming, the American people have been so very positive about it, and in a bipartisan way in Congress.
Madam Speaker, I appreciate your insight on the Would you mind talking about...
We can't hear you.
I'm so sorry. Madam Speaker, would you please weigh in on Roe v. Wade? I know
Yeah.
that you gave a statement yesterday. I was
Yeah.
hoping to talk about 2 points. One, respect for women, and two, the ratification of the event.
Yes. Well, thank you for asking. When I came back the night before last, we landed the night before last in Washington, D.C., and I came here the next morning. But when we landed there, to the horror of the Supreme Court draft of a decision that was an assault on women, lack of respect for women and their judgment, but it did violence not only to women, but to the Constitution of the United States. In case you haven't read the draft, it's a situation where they mock the former Chief Justice when Roe v. Wade was decided nearly 50 years ago. They mock him. They say privacy, they undermine it as a value in the Constitution. Precedent, forget about it. Even though this bill, a decision nearly 50 years ago has been reaffirmed one form or another 14 times by precedent in the court, which they all said they supported. So what I'm saying to people is keep your eye on the substance of it. The press, likes to say, well, there are two things here. How did the document get released and the decision? Now, the document getting released, okay, let's talk about that. What is important is the substance of it and what it means in the lives. Now, I have 5 children in 6 years and 1 week. Catholic, went to church in Poland and all that. So I respect the views of other people for themselves. I don't think they have any business telling women how they should deal with their own reproductive freedom and rights. And we already in the House, Mr. Kilmer and Congressman Kilmer, Congresswoman Strickland, were part of our voting to codify Roe v. Wade. We've done that months ago. We did it when the Texans did their thing about no freedom of choice and at the same time licensing vigilantes to go after people who might exercise their own decision making. So and then the court practically giving it an imprimatur, the Supreme Court. So we passed the bill months ago, and now we have to pass it in the Senate. And in order to pass it in the Senate, we have to win the election in November so that we have a couple more senators who would be willing to set aside the 60 vote requirement so that 51 votes can do it for us unless we can get some Republicans to support it. The two Republican senators who have spoken out, Senator Murkowski and Senator Collins, voted against this bill when it went over to the Senate. They may have their own bill. We're eager to see. We're welcome. We want it all to be bipartisan. But this is an assault on privacy. Who knows what's next? Who knows what's next? Marriage equality? There's so many things that are rooted in privacy in the Constitution that they could go after now. It's really appalling. And so let's not, people say, well, we should enlarge the court, we should, maybe. But right now, we just have to keep our eye on the ball. This is what they're doing. This is what it means to you. And overwhelmingly, the American people, at least 2-1, have said they want Roe v. Wade to be retained, and they oppose overturning it. So I thank you for the question. As a mother of 5 in 6 years and 1 week, I was like, what makes you think that is any of your business, you 9 people, or 5 of you, or how many of it is over there, including the Congress of the United States. So let's do what is right, what is in our Constitution, what is in our precedent, what honors privacy, which respects women, and just keep our eye on the ball, on the substance of it, because I'm going to tell you something. This is going to hurt low-income and minority women so fiercely. And that's part of their agenda. They do that every day anyway. But forgive me. I'm going into another subject here. I wish we could have all the bipartisanship in the world on this subject. Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you.
One last question. Madam Speaker, just to follow up on that, can you tell us, does this fundamentally change the dynamic of the midterm?
Well, I think women will remember in November, yeah. But I never, we're having a bipartisan moment here, but just in a matter of civics, I never had any intention of the Democrats not retaining the majority in November. I just left an event for Kim Schreier. Her election is very important to the Congress. Not as a number, not about quantity, but about the quality of her leadership in the Congress, the quality of the leadership of the Washington State delegation, House and Senate. And no, I had never. So when people would say, oh, history says, I'm not talking about history. We're talking about the future. We are talking about the future. So we will mobilize, we'll own the ground, getting out our vote, inspired by what we're doing for the American people at their kitchen table needs, as well as having the resources necessary to do that. The most important part, though, is the quality of the candidate, of the members of Congress and of the candidates. And we're very proud of our members and also those who will add to it. So, yeah, but in terms of a difference that this might make, I think it will make a difference. I wish it weren't. I wish it weren't partisan. This shouldn't even be a political issue. Mexico, Ireland, Italy, all open the doors for women to have freedom of choice, and they're all Catholic countries. Why this should be a political issue is most unfortunate. But in any event, getting back to where we are today, in a bipartisan way, to promote commerce, to clean up the air, to improve the quality of life, to respect the cultural heritage of it all, to do so in a way that creates good-paying jobs as we protect the environment, as we protect our planet for the children. Thank you.